I'm getting bored here. Alright guys, it's enough.
Booze and booze.
I went to summer camp a few times as a kid, 3 years in a row actually, 2000, 2001, and 2002. Back then, I was just this scrawny elementary schooler with a bad haircut and one pair of sneakers that I was terrified of ruining. The place I'm gonna talk to you about is called Rosethorn Retreat, and in the flyers they sent to my parents, it looked like a paradise because they always do, don't they? Mountains, rivers, smiling kids with fishing poles, counselors in matching shirts, and giving piggyback rides to all the kids. The slogan was something cheesy like, "The best outdoor experience in the state." Other kids from school would go too. It was one of those things that if you didn't go, you really felt like you were missing out. That first year, I didn't really want to go, but I ended up loving it. I made a lot of friends, got poison ivy, saw a moose. That usual kid stuff, you know? And the next year, I begged my parents to go back. But it was the third year, 2002, where things shifted. I was 9. My parents signed me up along with my best friend Michaela. We were both excited in the way only little girls can be buzzing about. We packed our swimsuits, flashlights, keychains, promised to share a sleeping bag if it got cold, whispered about the s'mores and our secret crushes. I thought it was going to be the best 2 weeks of our lives. But the minute the bus pulled up that summer, something felt off. The air was still hot and piney, but it was quieter somehow. The camp didn't look like how I remembered it from last year. The flowers were dead. The signs were all weathered and crooked. And when we got to our cabin, the door was hanging open, swaying slightly. And inside was barren. No bunks, just a few raggedy blankets and stained pillows thrown in a pile on the floor. It smelled like wet wood and mildew. I remember Michaela wrinkling her nose and whispering to me, "This doesn't feel right, does it?" So at first I told myself, okay, maybe they're remodeling. Maybe something happened to the original buildings, but it wasn't just the cabins. The counselors were different too, harsher even, short-tempered. One of them I remember from the year before, but these new ones looked older and tired. One of them barely even spoke at all. Another had a scar across her jaw. They did not smile, not even once. And I remember thinking to myself, this place doesn't want us here. That first full day was not much better. The food was cold eggs and gray sausage links. They literally tasted like rubber. The milk was warm. We tried not to complain, but everybody at the table was making faces, trying to choke it all down. When one of the boys gagged, a counselor quickly snapped at him, told him to eat it or go hungry. And just like that, no joke, no wink, I remember Michaela glancing up at me like, "Did you hear that?" Oh, I heard it. Everybody did. After breakfast, they sent us out for our nature hike, which turned out to be an hour of walking in circles on an overgrown trail just behind the mess hall. It was led by a counselor who didn't speak the entire time, not one word, just walked ahead of us, in fact, fast like he was mad, snapping branches out of the way with jerky, angry movements. Michaela made the mistake of asking a question, just a simple, "Hey, where are we going?" And the guy stopped dead in his tracks, turned around and said, "You don't get to ask questions at this camp, kid. Just keep walking." That was the moment I think we both knew for sure that something was indeed very wrong. We spent most of that day sitting around the cabin. No crafts, no lake time, just sitting on the hard floor while the heat poured in through the broken screens. One girl from another cabin came by crying because she'd gotten stung by something, couldn't find a counselor. We tried to help her, gave her some ice from our canteen, but when a staff member finally showed up and saw her in our cabin, he yanked her off by the arm, dragged her back outside without a word. And I don't remember seeing her again. On the third day, everybody was really on edge. Nobody was smiling anymore. Nobody was excited. Kids were whispering about being hungry or scared or wanting to go home. It was like the whole camp had turned into some kind of punishment, like we were all being punished for something we'd never done. That morning, they served us a bowl of plain rice for breakfast, and that's when Michaela snapped, and not in a dramatic way. She just stood up and said, "This is ridiculous. We're not doing anything fun. We're not learning anything." What is this?" Her voice was actually calm and reasonable, and I still remember the way the nearest counselor, this woman named Jerry, with short red hair and a real bitchy tone, froze in her place, her lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You think this is for fun?" Jerry asked. Michaela didn't answer. Nobody did. Jerry reached across the table, picked up Michaela's bowl of rice, and dumped it in the trash. "Well, no breakfast for you then," she said. "Put on your swimsuit. Now." Michaela looked down at me, stunned. "Why?" But the counselor was no longer listening. She grabbed Michaela by the arm and led her away. We watched them go, nobody saying a word. When we saw Michaela again 10 minutes later, she was in her swimsuit now, sitting cross-legged on the flagpole slab in the center of the camp. Just concrete and sun, no shade, no water. And the heat that day was brutal. 95 degrees. The air was barely even moving around us. She sat there for hours. I watched her through the window of the cabin, waiting for somebody to step in, a counselor, another adult, anybody, but nobody did. At one point, I tried to walk over to her and was stopped immediately. Another counselor, a tall guy with gray stubble and mirrored sunglasses, stepped in front of me and said, "Go back inside unless you want to sit next to her." Michaela didn't make it back to the cabin until sundown. She was beet red, shaking. Her lips were cracked too. She didn't even cry, she just made these short little gasps, like her breathing hurt. When she laid down beside me on the floor, I saw the backs of her legs. They were blistered. Her swimsuit had fused slightly to her skin. All she said was, "Don't say anything, just don't." So I didn't. From then on, every kid kept their head down. Nobody complained. Nobody asked for seconds. Nobody asked where the other missing kids had gone. We all just went where we were told and did what we were told and tried not to be noticed. And even then, some of us did. One boy, Jacob, had his sneakers taken away from him for talking back. They made him walk barefoot everywhere, even on the gravel trails. His feet were cut up and filthy by the end of the week. He was limping around. Another girl got caught sneaking crackers into her bedroll. They made her go without food for a day and a half, and I remember she passed out during the afternoon free time. One of the counselors dragged her under a tree and just left her there like trash. The worst were the kids who actually would push back, and they would get these quote-unquote work assignments, stacking firewood, digging ditches, cleaning toilets with rags and no gloves. One boy from cabin 3 was made to carry rocks from one end of the field to the other for hours, back and forth, while a counselor watched with this stopwatch. I remember him muttering, "This isn't camp, this is a prison." And he wasn't wrong. I started crying at night, quiet at first, just this little whimper into my pillow, but one night, I completely broke down harder than I meant to, couldn't stop shaking. I buried my face in the blanket, but I must have been louder than I thought I was. A shadow passed by one of the cabin windows, and a second later the door creaked open. Footsteps quickly came across that wooden floor. I went limp, still holding my breath. I thought maybe they'd check on me, tell me it's okay, that I was going home soon, but instead I felt this sharp jab into my ribs, a foot, and then another. "Shut up," a counselor whispered, and I recognized the voice immediately. It was Jerry. "You want everybody else to suffer because you can't control yourself, kid? Go ahead, keep crying. Find out what happens tomorrow." I stayed quiet and didn't make another sound. Not that night, and not for the rest of the trip. It all blurred into this one long, quiet nightmare. Nobody talked unless they had to. Nobody smiled. We kept our heads down and did exactly what we were told to do. We watched the counselors closely, like prisoners watching guards, waiting for the slightest shift in the mood. The fun parts of camp never came. No s'mores, no campfire songs, just chores, punishment, and fear. Michaela's skin was peeling off in sheets. Her shoulders were raw. She couldn't even lift her arms without wincing. And they never gave her any cream, any bandages, just more rice and more threats. I tried to just remain invisible, and that became my goal. Be invisible, make no noise. Don't flinch when the counselors bark at somebody else. Don't stare too long at the ones who don't come back. I think we lost 5 kids by the end of it, quietly just disappearing. Cabin beds left empty, their names never spoken of again. Nobody knew if they ran or were taken somewhere else because nobody dared ask. On the last day, I was really half convinced they weren't going to let us leave. that they'd say the buses broke down, that we had to stay for another week or something. I was already imagining which one of us would vanish next, but thank God the buses came. And when they did, it was like every kid's body deflated all at once. This quiet collapse, like our bones had been barely holding us upright. Parents stood by the gate smiling, waving, completely clueless. Michaela's mom ran straight to her and gasped out loud when she saw her arms. My mom grabbed me and said, "You look like you've lost weight." I nodded. I didn't respond. I couldn't talk. My throat hurt from holding everything in for so long. Then the other kids started talking, right there, while we waited to load up our bags. One kid shouted about how they hadn't eaten in 2 days. Another said a counselor hit him with a broom. Somebody else screamed, pointing at one of the staff members. "That's her! She made me sleep outside!" It all came spilling out, raw, loud, and messy. I remember the counselors looking pale for the first time, like they just realized the bus wasn't the end, that our parents had eyes, and that their time was up. Rosethorn Retreat was shut down later that summer, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we lived through it, that we actually survived. I don't care what anybody says, that camp was not a camp anymore. It was a prison. I only went to summer camp once, and if I had it my way, I would have never gone at all. I really wasn't one of those kids who would get all hyped up over bunk beds and bug juice. I grew up doing the real thing, camping with my folks, way out in the sticks, far enough from anything or anyone, plumbing or even pavement. We would pitch our tents on the bare ground, fish in creeks nobody had even named, and cook meat over fires that left our clothes stinking of smoke for days upon days. Summer camp with its scheduled hikes and cafeteria food always sounded like some watered-down version of the real deal. Wimpy stuff, little kids camping. But that summer, all my buddies were actually gonna go. Zack, Marcus, Theo, guys I'd known since kindergarten, and they'd been going to Camp Kettlebrook almost every July for years. They wouldn't shut up about it either, kept saying it was the best week of the year, canoeing, archery, night games, the works. So, they pushed hard that year, practically guilt-tripping me into tagging along. "Come on, dude," Zack said. "When else are we gonna have fun? Hang out for a whole week with no parents?" And I guess that's the part that stuck with me. A week with my crew before high school swallowed us whole. That was worth something. So I caved, packed a duffel, and rode out with them on that rickety yellow bus, halfway convinced that I was gonna immediately regret this. But when we rolled through those pine-lined gates, I saw the cabins tucked into the trees, smelled the smoke of the campfire already going in the center ring, and I felt something within me shift. Not awe exactly, but just curiosity. I really expected some kind of lame crafts and counselors with these fake smiles, but what I got was something else. The air smelled a lot cleaner, the lake looked bigger than I expected it to, and the staff weren't half as annoying as I thought they would be. Some of them were ex-military, lean and sharp-eyed, while the others looked like they'd come straight from some kind of Nirvana concert. It was this weird blend that seemed to be working. So I remember thinking to myself, alright, well, maybe this won't be that bad after all. I didn't know it then, but that week was going to be the best time of my life, but it was going to end with the worst nights that I've ever lived through. The first few days were a blur of dirt, sweat, and nonstop energy. We woke up to bugle calls, scarfed down snacks and pancakes, and then scattered across the camp like we'd been shot from slingshots. I got way into archery. Turns out I had a decent eye, and we spent afternoons paddling old canoes across the lake, tipping each other over like idiots. At night, we would cram into our cabins, 12 kids to a room, whispering and laughing until one of the counselors stomped in to tell us to shut up. And the food, I expected slop, but damn, it was good. Chili one night, pulled pork the next, cooked over wood fires, just smoky enough to feel like something out of the wilderness that I was used to. Maybe summer camp wasn't the real deal camping, but it had its own charm. Thursday night, though, was when things started to turn. The campfire burned hot and bright, surrounded by benches full of sticky mosquito-bitten kids. Somebody passed around s'mores and somebody else pulled out a guitar. Classic scene, I know, right? Then one of the counselors, Matt, this lanky guy with a beard, stood up and said, "All right, guys, I got one for you, a local one, and it's not some made-up ghost crap. This one's actually real." The kids got quiet. Even most of the counselors seemed to be leaning in. Matt stepped forward, firelight flicking across his face. "Back in '92, not too far from here, there was a guy. Prisoner transport gone wrong type of thing. Bus tipped over on one of those back roads. 2 guards dead, 1 guy missing. The name was Mason Keene. Life sentence for stabbing a woman to death in her driveway inside Springfield. Real sicko. They say he ran straight into these woods and was never seen again." Some of the kids snorted and others froze. "No, I'm being serious," Matt went on. "Every few years, somebody swears they saw a shadow moving just through the trees, past the camp perimeter. Tents slashed open, food stolen, strange footprints. And once," he leaned in close, "a counselor swore he saw a man crouching outside the cabin windows during lights out, just watching." For some reason, that last sentence got under my skin. I've heard plenty of campfire bullshit before, but Matt wasn't smiling. He wasn't even blinking. Then he just walked off after that. No punchline, no "just kidding," and then left the fire to burn and the kids to stew inside their sleeping bags. The next morning, we were up early for this long hike out to the series of swimming holes along a stream nearby. It was supposed to be this grand finale of the week. Miles of trail through some of the oldest forest I'd ever seen, ending in a deep cold water pool between these ancient rocks. It took hours to get there, winding through switchbacks and pine groves that felt almost untouched. We dropped our packs and dove in like maniacs, screaming from the shock of the cold, tossing each other around in the water. I remember the sunlight filtering through the trees, dappling the surface of the pool like a kaleidoscope. Later in the afternoon, most of the kids started packing up to head back with the counselors, but I wasn't ready. I found this shady spot behind a fallen log, half submerged in the water, and just wanted a few more minutes to myself. I told Zack I'd catch up with them. He gave me this look, but didn't argue. They were moving slow anyway. I figured I'll just trail behind and find them eventually. So that was my plan. I stayed maybe 20 minutes longer, soaking in the silence. Then I climbed out and dried off with a camp towel. Started back the way that I thought we came. The sun was now dipping below the tree line, throwing long shadows across the trail in front of me. I walked for about 10 minutes before something started to feel really off. The trail forked, and I didn't remember that. I stood there barefoot and dripping, staring down 2 dirt paths that looked like damn near identical to one another. No signs, no markers. So I guessed, picked a left one. I don't know why, I just felt right at the time. I kept walking, but the trail continued to narrow, overgrown in places like nobody had used this in years. Bugs in the air around me, and every step felt heavier and heavier. Another 15 minutes went by, and I came around a bend and the trail just collapsed. It dropped off suddenly, like an old drainage cut. I tipped straight into it before I could stop myself. I landed hard and scraped my forearm, rolled down a short slope into a shallow ravine, choked up with dead wood and leaves. I groaned and tried to get up. I froze. Everything was covered in webs, and not the kind you brush off your face in the woods either. These were thick, sticky, layered across the ground in sheets. Logs and logs were wrapped around in them. The air shimmered with thick threads hanging between branches. And that's when I felt them, spiders everywhere, big ones, some of the size of quarters, others even larger than that, crawling up my arms and my legs and my hair. I swatted, kicked, thrashed, but it only made things worse. They poured out of the logs like black ink, swarming toward the movement, curious or maybe just hungry. I clenched my teeth, trying not to scream. And that's when I heard footsteps above me on the edge of the ravine. I froze, but those spiders didn't. They kept crawling. My skin crawled with all of them. I looked up, heart pounding so loud that I thought it was about to burst. A man stood there, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He wasn't a counselor, and I don't know how I didn't know that, but I just did. He was far too still and quiet, just standing there, arms at his side, looking down at me like he found something interesting all about me. he didn't move and neither did I. Spiders crept across my face. One paused on my lip and I didn't breathe. Then he laughed. Yeah, he laughed. Low and creepy as hell, just this soft chuckle that barely even made it past the wind. He then turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees like smoke. I waited until the sounds of steps had vanished. Then I clawed my way out of that web-choked ravine, lungs burning, spiders still clinging to my skin. I didn't care which direction I ran, I just wanted out. I didn't stop running until my legs gave out. Somewhere along the way, I finally hit the trail again, the real one. I picked the other fork, praying it would take me back. The trees now looked familiar, but I couldn't be too sure. Everything blurred past me in green and brown streaks. I was scraped up, soaked in sweat, face covered in sticky strands and dried blood from where I must have scratched myself too hard. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain that I'd see that man again, just casually walking behind me, hands in his pockets like it was nothing. But he never came. I finally burst out of the woods near the edge of the camp, stumbling into a clearing like something half dead. The place looked like a war zone. All the campers were lined up in front of the cabins, some crying, others just pale and quiet. Counselors were running around with flashlights and radios, their voices all panicked. As soon as somebody saw me, they shouted my name and people rushed over. A counselor grabbed me by the shoulders and started looking me over for injuries, asking me what the hell happened. I couldn't get the words out fast enough. I took the wrong trail, I got lost, I slipped. There were spiders, I didn't know where. My mouth went dry. I wanted to say more. There was a man, I wanted to say it, but I stopped myself. The counselors ushered me toward the fire pit, wrapped me up in a blanket, and somebody handed me a bottle of water. Zack was standing nearby staring at me like he was looking at a ghost. One of the staff, a woman named Jenny, knelt down beside me. "You took the left fork?" I nodded. "That goes deep into the eastern woods, way off camp property. It's hardly maintained. You're lucky you didn't run into a bear, kid." I almost laughed. A bear would have been relief to what I saw and felt. I never said anything about the man, not even when my parents came to pick me up the following day, because what would I say? "Hey, remember that escaped prisoner from that campfire story? I think I saw him last night. He watched me get eaten alive by spiders and then just casually wandered off." No one would ever believe me, because hell, I barely even did. And that was my first and my last summer at Camp Kettlebrook. My story happened to me in the summer of 2018 when I was transitioning into 8th grade. I went to this sleepaway camp deep inside the Appalachian Mountains. I considered it a second home for me. This is one of the main reasons why I really loved summer, and it's my favorite season. I got along with everybody at camp. Well, except for this one person that made me see how dangerous others can really be. That summer, there was this new counselor whose name was Art. He looked to be about in his 50s due to his white hair and wrinkled skin. Being a camp counselor in your 50s does not really seem right to me, but I don't know how you guys feel about it. It just gives me kind of creepy vibes. When me and my bunk first met him, he seemed like a trustworthy person. For the first week of camp, he'd help us clean our bunks when it was dirty and talk to us whenever we were feeling down. Me and my bunkie wouldn't have a problem with him at first, but the girls around camp slowly started to talk about Art behind his back, and they said things like, "He's just a creepy old man that probably preys on children." After all, he was way older than all the other counselors, so I guess I can kind of see where they're coming from. But one night, things got a little intense. We had this recess night where we got to do whatever we wanted. Me and my fellow bunkies played tennis with each other. During that game, Art would watch us the whole time, giving off this big grin that looked a lot like Pennywise. This was really creepy. Why was he smiling at us like that? Part of me tried to rationalize that he was just admiring how much fun we were having, but my story doesn't end there. One night I came out of the shower and saw this shaving cream bottle. Now, just so you know, this is when I was starting to go through my puberty phase, but I didn't have any facial hair yet. I walked over to the bottle where it was in the bathroom sink, grabbed it, and examined it. As soon as I did that, I felt this tense hand touch my arm. I turned around to see who it was, and of course, it was Art. His facial expression as he looked at me was just giving off these super creepy vibes, and that's when he spoke. "Listen to me, you little shit. I'm not gonna have you touch my belongings, ever. You got that?" I honestly had no idea what was going on. It came out of nowhere and so fast, and I was really scared, so I just immediately responded with, Yeah, I'm sorry." "Good. You better not do it again, or I'll kill you." He threatened me, and then I walked out of the bathroom with my bathrobe still on. I was surprised nobody else in the bunk had heard that whole encounter. I no longer felt comfortable being around him or even telling anybody about this. I was just embarrassed. I let it cool off, but from there, I just tried my best to avoid Art as much as I could. Fast forward to the end of the first week of camp. One last thing happened that almost made me want to go home and never return. I think it was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday night on the second week of camp, and me and my bunkie were just heading back from movie night. And just so happened to be Art's night off. This made me happy because I didn't feel safe around him, knowing he just threatened me just a few days prior. We got back to the cabin, and I'd say around 15 minutes inside the building, I heard this screaming coming from a far distance. There was definitely like 10 little girls screaming at the same time. It was hard to miss and hard not to hear. This went on for another minute or so, then it stopped abruptly. Me and my other bunkmates looked at each other in total confusion. What the hell's going on out there? We had 3 counselors present with us that night, and 2 counselors told us to stay there and they were going to investigate. We all stayed and just listened. I think an hour and a half passed and those 2 counselors were still gone. Something big and major had to have happened. Not long after, it was time for lights out, so the counselor who was still with us turned the lights off and we all got in bed. I guess maybe we would find out what happened the next morning. So, morning comes. We were eating breakfast at the dining hall. We were allowed to sit wherever we wanted to, so that's what we did. I sat down with a few of my bunkmates and some older girls sat down with us. As we were eating, one of the girls finally told us the whole story about what took place last night. One of the younger girls' cabin had some noises coming from the bathroom. While the other counselors were outside talking to each other, the girls went to see what the noise was. When they reached the bathroom stall where it was coming from, they opened up the door and saw a 50-year-old counselor, Art, sitting on the toilet with his pants down, revealing his genitals. All he did was smile and say, "Hey, pretty girls," and that's when chaos ensued. All the girls started screaming and ran back to the cabin. They ran so far into the woods shrieking while one of the other 2 counselors followed behind. Art was still inside the bathroom while the 2 counselors remained at the cabin, and the others, including 2 of mine, went inside. They all saw Art sitting on the toilet with his pants down. That's when 3 male counselors wrestled Art to the ground and held him there. Another called the police on his walkie-talkie. Once they arrived, Art was still down in that same position, and that's when he was taken away in a police car. He was still in custody that morning, and a group of young girls had to sleep in a couple of other cabins because they clearly were no longer comfortable being left alone. Everybody at my table just stopped eating. Everybody's jaw was on the floor. My heart goes out to those little girls who saw true evil and terror that night. I think I did one more summer after that, and Art obviously never returned to the camp again. I hope to God he's in some sort of institution or prison far away from children. Monsters like him should be held there for a very long time, even life. I hope he's getting everything he deserves in there, because child predators like him don't belong in this world. I worked as a summer counselor for 3 years during college. It was definitely the job that just made sense at the time. It lined up with my class schedule, kept me outside, and best of all, came with room and board. The camp was right on the Oklahoma border. I was going to school in Texas, so every summer I'd pack up my beat-up Corolla and make that 2.5-hour drive north, windows down, sipping on some gas station coffee, while the roads would get narrower and narrower and the trees get thicker. Camp Galloway, that's the name, and most people haven't heard of it. It's not flashy or commercial, but it had a good reputation, especially with parents who wanted their kids off their screens for a while. It's tucked between a couple of ridgelines, with a river nearby and just enough cell service to maybe get a text out if you stood on a hill and prayed hard enough. The camp had been around forever, like 1920s forever, and every cabin looked like it. Wooden structures with creaky floors, no air conditioning, and showers that never seemed to have any kind of warm water, but it worked. The kids loved it, and most of the time, so did I. The job itself was usually pretty chill. Morning flagpole, meals in the mess hall, organized hikers, arts and crafts, and lakeside swimming. There was always this kind of rhythm to it, a controlled chaos that made the days go by pretty fast. The nights were even better. Once the kids were down, us counselors had maybe an hour to breathe, sit out by the fire pit, sip something non-alcoholic out of beat-up old mugs, tell some kind of dumb story, and just decompress. Then crash in our shared bunks, dead tired, sounds of the forest humming us deeply into sleep. And that's the part I really liked, the quiet, the calm. But on this summer, that routine shattered. One night where everything flipped on its head, and I saw something that I still can't explain. So I guess I'm gonna tell you about it. That night changed how I looked at the woods, and it made me wonder just how close danger can sit right on your door before it actually decides to knock. It happened on the first week of the season. We just finished onboarding a new batch of kids. I think 100 in total, ages 7 to 12. The first week is smooth. The kids are still nervous and on their best behavior. The weather had actually been perfect. Sunny days, cool nights, and just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes moving around you. That particular day had been textbook: swimming, a mountain hike, killer dinner, and fireside ghost stories. Classic summer camp stuff. By lights out, every kid was wiped. They dropped like dominoes in their bunks. Even the loud ones got quiet for once. I was in my cabin, top bunk, sharing the space with 3 other counselors. I think it was close to 1 a.m. I remember vaguely drifting in and out, listening to the night sounds around me. The usual crickets, the occasional owl. Somebody's fan was humming near one of the windows, and I could hear a kid a cabin over talking and asleep. It was peaceful. The kind of peace you really only get when you're in the middle of nowhere. And then the siren hit. It started out like a slow mechanical whine, escalated fast into this full-blown scream, loud and super jarring, echoing through the trees. We didn't even have a moment to be confused. All 4 of us counselors bolted upright. My heart was in my throat. That siren was only supposed to go off for one reason: tornado protocol. I grabbed my shoes and ran out barefoot, half dressed and into the open. It was total chaos. Kids were everywhere, screaming and running, pushing past each other in this blind panic. Some were crying, others were yelling for their siblings. A couple of the counselors were already out there trying to wrangle people, but it was like trying to put a lid on a boiling pot. The sky was turning, clouds churning fast, trees whipping in the wind. You could feel the storm before you even saw it. "All right, get them inside now," our camp lead Tim was yelling out. "Open the windows and get them down now." That was procedure. Get the kids into the cabins, open all the windows to equalize the pressure, then hunker down away from the glass. It was basic safety, but none of that works when kids scatter like rats in a flood. I started yelling out names, grabbing the ones that I recognized, guiding them quickly toward their bunks. Some listened, but most of them didn't. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the panic had. You could see it in their faces, and the worst part was the forest. That tree line, the usually peaceful and distant, was suddenly full of movement. Kids were running straight into it, away from camp and into the black. I didn't think, I just sprinted after them, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The beam was bouncing off trees, roots, and brush. I shouted myself hoarse, calling out names, begging them all to come back to me. I must have ran for 10 minutes before I found the first one. A small boy named Eli crouched behind a log, crying and holding his ankle. I lifted him up and carried him on my back until we made it to the edge of camp, where another counselor took him from me, and I went back in. I found another girl sitting on a rock, too scared to move. Another kid running in circles, confused, screaming for his brother. Bit by bit, slowly, I started to gather them all, at least a dozen. I kept rounding them all up, pointing them toward the camp lights, shouting, "Go! Just run towards the building, kids, go, now!" The wind was picking up, branches were falling. The siren had stopped, but the sky was darker now, swollen with something that felt almost alive. I was soaked in sweat and breath burning when I heard something else. A scream, high-pitched and sharp, but it was a different kind of scream. Not panic, not fear, but one of pain. I followed that sound, cutting through the thick brush until I found them, two shapes on the ground, and I froze. I lifted the flashlight, hit them both with the beam. An older boy, maybe 15 or 16, was on top of a much smaller girl, pinning her down. His hands were clamped around her wrist. She was kicking and trying to twist away. Her face was red and streaked with tears. "Hey, what the f—" I bellowed, charging forward. "Get off of her!" The boy's head snapped up and his eyes caught the light, wild, confused, and angry. Then just like that, he shoved off her and then sprinted off into the woods. Gone. I swiped the flashlight beam left and right, trying to catch him again, but there was nothing. Not a sound, not even a snapped twig as he ran off. I then turned back to the girl. She was curled up now, shaking and crying, arms over her head. Hey, you're okay now, you're okay." I knelt down beside her, did my best to speak over the rising wind. "Come on, let's get you back to camp." She didn't even talk, didn't say a word, just nodded while her whole body was trembling. I walked her back myself, one hand on her shoulder, the other gripping that flashlight like a weapon. When we stepped out of the trees, I saw the other counselors finishing the head count. Kids were filing back into their cabins. The storm had shifted directions or passed, I'm not sure. Either way, it never touched down and we lucked out that night. I pulled Sim aside immediately, told him about what happened, the scream, the boy, and what I just witnessed. We did another head count. Every camper was accounted for. So were all the staff. I checked the faces, every kid, every boy. I did not recognize the one that I just saw out there, and I didn't see him again because he hadn't come back. And that girl, she couldn't give us much. She said she was running, thought somebody was helping her, then he tackled her, and that was that. I kept thinking about it though, how he looked, about his size, his build, his face, shadowed and vacant. He didn't look like one of our campers. He looked older, too old to be a camper, but not old enough to be out here all alone. Once the weather cleared and the sirens stayed quiet, the forest went still again, but nobody really slept, not really. The kids were rattled, sure, but it was the counselors. We were the ones looking over our shoulders now, checking the locks twice, taking turns walking the perimeter in shifts like we were guarding something, or waiting for something to come back, I guess. That poor girl never changed her story. She never saw his face clearly, just felt somebody grab her. She thought maybe it was a counselor trying to help her back to camp until, well, it wasn't. She said he was whispering to her, just one word, but she couldn't really say what it was. She just shook her head and cried harder as she remembered it. We filed a report with the local law enforcement, told them a stranger might have slipped into the property. They sent a deputy out the next morning, did this basic kind of sweep over the grounds. But of course nothing turned up, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anybody who didn't belong there. I asked about surveillance, but there wasn't any. Camp Galloway was too remote for that kind of infrastructure. So officially, nothing happened. But unofficially, I think about that night more than I really want to admit it to you. I think about the way that kid ran, fast and sure-footed, like he knew those woods. I think about the weird silence that followed, the way he disappeared like smoke. And I think about how calm he looked when the flashlight hit him, not scared or even surprised. He wasn't some panicked teenager. I know what I saw. I keep wondering how long he'd been out there, watching and waiting. Not if he would find somebody, but when. It wasn't like he was hunting the camp, he was just close enough, hovering at the edge, hoping for a crack in the routine, for an opportunity. That storm, that siren, that was his window. Talk about going from bad to worse.